Hello, and today I'm going to show you how to make a classic Bakewell tart. To do this we need 250 grams of plain all-purpose flour, 180 grams of caster sugar, 180 grams of ground almonds, 100 grams of powdered sugar, 156 grams of grated cold unsalted butter, 180 grams of cubed softened unsalted butter. We also need some very, very cold iced water. We need some almond extract, 4 eggs, flaked almonds, and some good raspberry jam. So we're going to make the pastry first. We're going to put the grated butter into the flour. We're going to try and handle this butter as little as possible. We want to keep that butter cold. Now what I'm doing here is just popping it into the bowl and then coating that already grated cold butter with the flour so it doesn't clump together. This is really, really important. You mustn't handle it too much. The best pastry is a cold pastry. Ideally, what we're going to do is rub the butter and the flour together with our hands, making sure that it comes out like a fine breadcrumb. Now, because this is a sweet pastry, we need to add some powdered sugar, or icing sugar as we call it here in the UK. We want about 2 tablespoons of powdered sugar. That's really your preference. You can put 1 tablespoon in, you can put 2 tablespoons in, you could put 3 if you want, if you like it really, really sweet. But we're just adding that sweetness. We want to rub it through our fingers and just literally sifting it through and rubbing it together. I tend to not do this because it warms the pastry up. I have this very nifty little gadget. I got it from Amazon and I think it was about £4, and it stops the pastry getting warm when you're rubbing it through your fingers. It's just simply chopping up that butter and mixing it with that flour and icing sugar. This way, by using this handy little tool, you are not warming up the pastry with your fingers. Now, it's called a pastry blender. I got mine from Amazon and I've popped a link in the description below. You can get it anywhere really. Any kitchen shop should have a pastry blender. It is brilliant. It also cuts down the time of making pastry significantly. Before, it would take me 10 minutes to turn this mix into breadcrumbs. Now it literally takes me 2 to 3 minutes to make pastry this way. I will say I'm not affiliated with Amazon. I have not been paid by this company. It is just purely my personal preference. You could also use a blender if you want a food processor, but I don't have one. So I stick to a pastry cutter. Now, as you can see, we're just literally squashing it all the way through. And because of those little indents in the pastry blender, you are cutting up that butter and flour mix. Give it a bit of a shake, and this raises the larger clumps to the surface at the top, and you can see them and work them. We want a fine breadcrumb consistency because the more incorporated that butter is into that flour, the better your pastry will be. And we do want a nice short crust pastry, especially for this beautiful English Bakewell tart. So just simply keep breaking down that butter and the flour mixture until you have a fine breadcrumb consistency. It shouldn't really take too long. And again, make sure that you shake your bowl to raise all those clumps at the top to make sure that you have those clumps rising to the top so you have a nice fine breadcrumb mixture. This is a foolproof pastry recipe. If you wanted a normal short crust pastry, not a sweet crust pastry, just don't add the powdered sugar. If you omit the powdered sugar, you'll just have a normal pastry that you can use for pies and quiches and all sorts. It's just a very simple short crust pastry recipe. So we're now getting to the stage where it is a nice fine breadcrumbs. Can you see? There's no clumps. It's all nice and fine. It looks like breadcrumbs. And now we need to add a yolk. That's 1 egg yolk. Simply, no white, just the egg yolk. So we're going to pop that into the bowl and we're going to take a knife. Do not use your fingers because again, we want to keep this pastry as cool as possible, and just simply incorporate that egg as much as you can. Now, it looks like it's clumping. Don't worry. When you add the water, it will all start coming together. But the most important thing is ice cold water. I have got 2 ice cubes in my water. Now we want to add 4 tablespoons of ice cold water to start with. Now this is where it's going to vary. You may need more, you may not, but you just want to try and incorporate that water. And what we're trying to do is make a firm dough. So we're just simply mixing it round with the knife and trying to get all of that dough formed. So as you can see, it is starting to clump together, but we still have quite a lot of the breadcrumbs that are not forming part of that dough. So just simply keep mixing, keep incorporating it, and if you need any more water, just slowly add a little bit in at a time. The reason why we add a little bit at a time, because if you overwater your pastry, then you will get a soggy dough and this will shrink in the oven. We don't want that at all. So I've added another tablespoon of the ice cold water to my mixture, and you can see it's just starting to clump together. Now this is the only time I'm ever going to use my hands in a pastry recipe, because you're going to need to form that dough with your hands. So I'm going to take my rings off, because we really don't want doughy rings, do we? And we're going to slowly start bringing it from the side and pushing it down, trying to handle it as little as possible because we don't want that dough to start warming up. So just simply push it down in from the sides into the middle to try and incorporate that into a firm dough for the pastry. So as you can see, it's starting to come together. I'm going to need a tad little bit more. So I've just added probably half a teaspoon of cold water. I'm just going to mix that in with the knife. Again, try to handle it as little as possible with my warm hands, although my hands are actually freezing. And then again, go in with your hands and just start to bring that pastry dough together. You can see it's really starting to form a nice dough. So just bring it all together from the sides to form a ball. Everybody thinks pastry is hard to make, but if you stick to these principles, it really isn't. I think I'm going to need a little bit more water in this one because you can see it's not all quite incorporating. So just another glug of ice cold water. That's probably another tablespoon of water that I've just added. And what we want to do is once this has actually come together, we're going to chill it in the fridge in some cling film. We don't need to oil the cling film because it's not sticky. It shouldn't be sticky anyway. It should be just firm to the touch, but not sticky. If it's sticky, you've added too much water. Simply add a little bit of flour again, and that should take away the stickiness. So we're just forming it now into a nice ball. You can see that it's starting to come together and it's clumping nicely. I'm trying to touch this as little as possible with my hands. And as you can see, it's forming a nice ball. We're just going to pat that all together. So when it sits in the fridge, all cling filmed up for 15 minutes, that's all going to settle and it'll be ready for rolling. I mean, you can make this the day before. That's not a problem. It will sit in your fridge for a couple of days. But the minimum it needs to chill for in your fridge is 15 minutes. Simply wrap it in cling film, chill in the fridge, and that is how easy pastry can be. Our pastry has been chilling in the fridge for 15 minutes and it's time to roll it out. So what we want to do is we want to lightly dust the surface with flour because we don't want that pastry to stick to the surface. It should be relatively easy to roll out. We also want to make sure that our rolling pin is slightly floured. Again, the same principle to that. We do not want the pastry sticking to the rolling pin. So just press it down. And what we're trying to do is get a depth of the pastry. It needs to be about 1.5 millimeters. So it doesn't need to be very thin and it doesn't need to be very thick. But what we're looking to do is get a nice thin sheet of pastry. Now I'm using a non-stick fluted flan tin and it is 23 centimeters, which is 9 inches. So what I'm doing here is making sure that I'm flipping over each side of the pastry so it doesn't stick to the bottom. But I'm trying to get that pastry as thin as I possibly can, because we don't really want a thick pastry because it's going to take longer to cook in the oven. It's also, you're going to take away the nice taste of the tart if your pastry is too thick. But if you keep flipping it over and rotating it, you're going to try and get a even thin pastry, but it's also in a round. So when we pop it on our flan tin, then it will fit beautifully. As you can see, I'm just spinning it around and rolling it to try and get it as thin as possible. We don't want it too thin because otherwise the pastry will then break and the contents, the frangipane and the jam that we're going to be using as a filling to this Bakewell tart will leak through. So you want at least a little something of substance. Try and get it as thin as you can, but not too thin, which is why I say, wow, about 1.5 to 2 millimeters in thickness. So I'm just going to check that my pan, yep, there we go. It's going to make sure that the pan is in the middle and that you have enough pastry to go up the sides and over a little bit. So we have that extra little bit of pastry. So we're just going to pop that into our flan tray. It doesn't need to be greased, it doesn't need to be buttered, and we're just going to gently pat down the sides into those little creases of the flan tin. So just what I tend to do is I cut off a little bit of pastry that we're not going to need and then just simply press that in, and that then gets it in those little indents, those little curved bits. And you can be quite rough with this pastry because it's not too crumbly. You don't want a crumbly pastry because that's just going to fall apart. It is quite pliable, so just literally pop it in the edges and that then gets it right into those corners and those crevices. We then need to trim it. Now, you want a little bit over the edge because if you don't have something over the edge of the tin, it has the possibility to shrink. And if that shrinks, we are going to lose our beautiful frangipane mix. What we're going to do is just use a fork and just poke some very gentle holes in the pastry. Don't go through the pastry, just poke it. We're going to then trim it so you've got about 1 centimetre overhang of the flan tin. This will come off once it's baked, don't worry about it. Again, it's to avoid that shrinkage and it's to make sure that beautiful frangipane mix that we're about to mix up doesn't escape. So there we go, we're just going to trim it, and this now needs to chill in the fridge for about 15 minutes. Again, you can do this the day before. You don't have to use this straight away. It can be done the day before and it can be chilling for 24 hours. But the reason why we chill it in the fridge is just to let it settle so it goes from a cold fridge to a hot oven. After your pastry has chilled, we need to get some baking parchment and some baking beans. If you don't have baking beans, you can use any kind of dried lentil or pea. I use baking beans because it's easier. But we just turn the baking parchment into a circular, and I just simply do this by folding it and folding it again and folding it again until you get a little triangle and then cutting it into a circle. We're going to bake this pastry blind. The reason why we do that is that we bake it blind for 15 minutes. We then take off the beans and the parchment, and this makes sure that the pastry is well cooked. We do not want a soggy bottom, which is why we bake the pastry blind. And by blind baking, it actually removes any excess moisture from the dough, which could slow down the baking process and you won't get that nice crisp pastry. So our dough has been chilling. We're going to pop our baking parchment into our pastry, and we want to make sure that it goes over the sides and it goes into the cracks as well. Then pour in your baking beans. Just gently push them down to make sure they get into the sides. Now we're going to want to bake this at gas mark 4, 180 degrees C, fan 160 C, 350 Fahrenheit for 15 minutes. Once it's baked for 15 minutes, remove that baking parchment and the baking beans and then cook for a further 10 minutes until it is golden colour and it's dry and light to the touch. Leave it to cool slightly and we'll get on with the filling. Time to make the frangipane. I've brought out my KitchenAid. If you don't have one, you can do this by hand, or you can do it with a hand mixture as well. Here is our beautiful gold pastry. Not too cooked, because don't forget it's going to continue cooking when we do our frangipane in the oven. So firstly, we're going to put the cubed 180 grams of unsalted butter into our mixer, or into our bowl if you're using a hand mixer. We want it nice and softened because we want to cream the butter and the sugar together. So if you have a soft butter, this is a far better way to do it. If your butter is cold, it's not going to come up very well. It's going to be a little bit more stiffer. We're going to add 180 grams of caster sugar. Now, I've actually used vanilla caster sugar. Can you remember in my previous cake video, I told you that if you had the vanilla pods that you'd scraped out, don't throw those vanilla pods away, pop them in your sugar and you get vanilla caster sugar. So just simply mix it up now. What we're looking to do now is just cream that sugar and that butter together until it goes lighter in colour. Shouldn't take too long, providing your butter is at room temperature. It's easy with one of these mixers. It's pretty quick. But if you're doing it either by hand or by hand whisk, then it may take a little bit longer. But we just want to get a creamed butter sugar mixture and it goes lighter in colour. Once we've achieved that, you'll be able to see it with your eyes, and it will literally go lighter in front of your eyes. It's time to add in a teaspoon of almond essence. This is just going to enhance that almond flavour, although we do have ground almonds in this frangipane. Just simply put a teaspoon of almond essence in there, and as you can see, it is getting slightly lighter in colour. It's starting to really cream together, so you can see that the butter and the sugar is being incorporated. And when it starts to suddenly get a lot softer, you know that it's pretty much done. Now we're going to add 3 eggs to this mixture. We're going to add them one at a time. The reason why we add 1 egg at a time is that we do not want this mixture to split. Now that can happen if your eggs are too cold, or if your butter is too cold and you add something warm and it just looks like an absolute mess. We don't want that. So we're just going to slow the mixer down, add 1 egg to the mixture until that is thoroughly incorporated. What you might need to do is, if you're using a stand mixer like I am, you may need to kind of stop the mixer and push down the sides of the mixture to make sure that those eggs are being incorporated well. If you don't do this, again, that can make the mixture split. If you don't make sure that all of those eggs are incorporated one at a time, it will split and it won't taste its best. You can recover from it being split by just adding a spoonful of flour into that, and it will bring it back to life. But I'm a firm believer as if you have split your mixture, it's not going to taste its best. So in goes another egg, and again we're just going to slowly mix this in to incorporate 1 egg at a time to make sure that it's not split. We're going to add our final egg into the mix and just let that go for a little bit to make sure that all of those eggs are incorporated into that mixture. As you can see, it's getting a nice golden colour. It's now time to add our 180 grams of ground almonds. There is no flour in this filling. It's just purely almonds, eggs, sugar, butter and almond extract. We're just simply going to mix that in very, very lightly. Doesn't need to be over mixed. Pretty much foolproof at this point. Once you've got this mixture and it's not split, then you're good to go. It's time to add the delicious raspberry jam. It's not my raspberry jam, it's not Megan's raspberry jam, it is just Aldi raspberry jam. I use seeded raspberry jam because I quite like those little pops of seeds. You don't actually have to use raspberry. You can use apricot, you can use blackcurrant, you can use strawberry. Traditional Bakewell Tart is always with raspberry jam though. The beauty of this recipe is that you can tailor it to yourself, much like however much powdered sugar you put in the pastry. You can put however much jam you want in this. If you like your Bakewell tart really jammy and really sweet, add lots of jam. Don't like it too sweet and too tart, then don't add too much jam. I just simply spoon it until the bottom of the pastry is covered. Now, I've probably used about 3/4 of this jar of jam. As I said, it was just the specially selected Aldi jam, raspberry jam, and we're just simply going to spread it out. We're going to try and make sure that all of the bottom of that pastry, try not to get it at the sides because that's where your frangipane is going to be, and we're just going to just spread that jam out on the base of that tart just as evenly as you can. If, like I said, if you want more, add the whole jar. If you want less, then don't. You still need a little bit. But it's now time to add the frangipane mixture. So all we're going to do is just simply take a spoonful of that frangipane mixture. Because it's a really thick mixture, you need to do this in little sections. You can pipe it if you want. I'm not that fancy. I just simply plonk it in there. So just take half a spoonful and just kind of dollop it all the way round to try and get as much of that bottom surface area covered, because we don't want to bring that jam up through that frangipane. We want the frangipane to sit on top of that jam. Obviously, when it goes in the oven, it will all evenly distribute, but we're trying to not disturb that jam as much as possible. So just simply spoon out your frangipane mixture into the bottom, over onto the jam, and then we are going to start to spread out that frangipane as gently as we can. Make sure that you get all the bits out of the mixing bowl. You don't want to waste that because that frangipane is delicious. This is a firm family favourite. My whole family know that I make this Bakewell tart, and when they know I'm making it, my mum even puts orders for her residents of where she lives. Can I have a Bakewell tart? Yes, okay, thank you very much. I made one for her last week and it went down like a treat. So we're just going to simply spread as gently as we can. As you can see, it's quite thick, but don't worry, try and spread it as evenly as you can. So we are then going to sprinkle some flaked almonds on top of this. Now, I add probably about 3 tablespoons of flaked almonds. Again, you don't have to do this, it just adds that element of extra crunch. You only have to do a few. I like a lot of almonds on my Bakewell tart because it adds that beautiful crunch. Now we're going to pop this in the oven now for 35 to 40 minutes at the same temperature as before. So that's gas mark 4, 180 degrees C, fan 160, 350 Fahrenheit. You'll know when it's done because it has a slight jiggle about it. And it is golden brown. We now need to let that completely cool before we add our embellishments to the top. You don't have to add this bit because I'm going to drizzle it with some icing sugar over the top. You don't have to do that at all. If you think it's sweet enough, then that's fine. But you need to let it completely cool before you do the icing sugar. And what we're going to do now is we're going to trim off that excess pastry because we want to make it as beautiful as possible. Simply get a sharp knife and just shave it. You've got the edge of the tin and you just simply go around and shave that pastry off to take off the extra pastry and to make your lines beautiful. Now, the reason why we do that extra, as I've explained, is just in case your pastry has added too much moisture to it, it will shrink. If you have that extra little bit over the side, then you're going to avoid your frangipane spilling out completely. And it's just a safe way of making sure that your pastry is okay and that your filling doesn't go all over your oven. So we're just simply shaving it all the way down. Your pastry is buttery enough and it should just come off quite quickly and easily with the use of a sharp knife and your fingers as well. I actually quite like this little bit because I find it quite cathartic because you get to see the lamination of that beautiful buttery short crust pastry, and you also get to nab a bit too just to taste it. And if you followed the recipe so far I mean, you can see it is a pretty straightforward recipe for Bakewell Tart. It is foolproof if you follow those very easy, simple steps. Once you have taken the excess pastry from the sides, you want to take it out of the tin, and the majority of flan tins come with a loose bottom, so I'm just going to put that to one side. I'm going to tidy up a little bit. I know that's a lot of wasted pastry, but believe me, it was needed just for that security of not letting the filling leak out. So here we go. I'm just going to pop it onto a beautiful plate, and it's time to decorate it. Like I said, you don't need to do this, but you just take your powdered sugar, icing sugar, and add probably about a teaspoon of cold water. And just what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a consistency with that powdered sugar, icing sugar, of stringiness. You don't want it globbing, you don't want it too runny, but what you want to do is it's almost like a ribbon. So when you bring your spoon up, it creates like a ribbon. And all we're going to do is just drizzle that icing sugar over the Bakewell tart. As you can see, it's like a ribbon, and over it goes in a zigzag formation. You can do whatever formation, whatever design you want. You can cover it all if you really, really want, and add glacé cherries to it. It's up to you. But I just like this very simple design of the zigzags and the minimal amount of icing sugar. You don't want I don't like too much icing sugar because it is sweet enough. And when you're adding icing sugar, it's just purely sugar and water. You are literally adding more sugar to your dessert. So just a very minimal drizzle is what I always do. And it is now time to see exactly how beautiful this Bakewell tart is. Honestly, it's a beautiful thing. It is so quintessentially English. And once you actually make this, you won't believe A, how easy it is to make, and B, how amazing it tastes. I hope that you have really enjoyed this tutorial on how I make my Bakewell tart. I hope that you try this, enjoy it, and you have fun with it. Because ultimately, I find joy in cooking. I love cooking. I love sharing recipes, and I love feeding people, basically. Just look at that. You can see the frangipane, you can see the beautiful layer of raspberry jam, and more importantly, that very, very beautiful flaky pastry. My Bakewell tart, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed it.